Hello everyone, today we're going to be covering Game 4 of the Meijinsen between Meijin Fujii Sota and his challenger Itodani Tetsuro. So Itodani is down 0-3, and the games, he's tried to do some weird things to try and get Fujii out of prep, and they kind of haven't worked. So we're just going to see what he can do to try and scrounge up a game in this series. And the opening in this game was actually very similar to the opening in game 2, with this kind of offbeat move from Itodani, silver to 4-2. In game 2, I believe this pawn wasn't quite pushed yet, so this position with silver to 4-2 happened a bit earlier in the game. And usually you don't do this because if bishop takes, your gold kind of makes a wall. But actually, also, even in game 2, Fujii didn't exchange the bishops. Instead, he goes ahead and trades the pawns, and Itodani brings the silver. So in game 2, Fujii had retreated his rook to 2-5. And he actually took quite a bit of time to do that. I think he wasn't expecting this opening. But in this game, he pretty quickly retreated his rook back to 2-8. So I'm assuming after game 2, he went back and studied the position and decided, okay, rook all the way back to 2-8 is probably better here. Itodani goes ahead, blocks the rook with the pawn. And this game actually slows down quite a bit from here. There's not really much either player can do. Itodani's pretty committed to playing Yagura with the silver on 3-3, and Fujii decides to play Gangi against it. And so this is pretty a quintessential matchup, Gangi versus Yagura. It's one I've played quite a bit. And the matchup changes based on exactly which flavor of Yagura gets played. So for now, Itodani is keeping his pawn back on 4-3. There's obviously the more classical variation where the pawn gets pushed to 4-4 and the gold gets up to 4-3. So yeah, exactly what you want to do as the Gangi player depends on what the Yagura player does. So as long as Itodani's kind of waiting, Fujii's also waiting. Itodani decides to play this variation where you trade the pawns in the 7th file with the bishop first. And you'll notice that Fujii is not dropping the pawn to kick the bishop back. That's because, hey, like, he can't drop the pawn anyway, and you don't want to give up that pawn in hand. He decides to pull the bishop back so that it doesn't get attacked. And also, I believe around here, he probably already decided that he wanted to put the king in the center and bring the bishop this way. I think we've talked about this in some other Gangi videos. There's been a lot of Gangi in my videos recently. And that's like a good shape to have this bishop on 5-7. Seeing this, Itodani pushes the pawn on 4-4. He's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to break through. I'm going to go ahead and castle my king a bit further. And after seeing this, Fujii responds by bringing the gold up to 4-8. And this pretty much confirms, okay, he's going to put his king in the center, pull the rook back, and let it defend the back rank. So yeah, we still just get a bunch of castling and maneuvering for quite a while in this game. And here is where Fujii decides to start his attack. So when you're playing Gangi against Yagura, almost always your attack is going to start with this pawn 4-5 move. Basically, what you really want is to get the knight onto 4-5 attacking this silver. And we're going to see this shortly, and you're going to see why it's so strong. Fujii decides to put some moves in on the edge first. And Itodani slides his rook over. Fujii gets his gold out of the scope of the rook. And Itodani pulls his silver back to give the rook, to clear the way for the rook. But remember, one of the nice things about this shape for Fujii is that the rook guards the back rank, and so Itodani can't actually promote his rook right away. He's going to need to figure out a bit more. Fujii pushes his 6th file pawn, saying, hey, I want to trade bishops. Itodani says no, pulls his bishop all the way back. This is probably a bit of a mistake. I'm not sure why he didn't just trade. Hard to say, because when you put it all the way back on 5-1, it's not quite doing anything. Perhaps he thought that if he trades the bishops now, his camp's a little weak and his rook's going to get bullied a little bit. So he decides to pull the bishop back, and now Fujii gets to jump this knight to 4-5. Itodani runs the silver while attacking the knight. Fujii counterattacks with the pawn, and then he drops a pawn here on 7-6 to block the rook. And this is kind of the strength of this knight to 4-5 move, and why it's so strong against Yagura is, especially in this variation is that you can actually just ignore the fact that the silver can take it, because if the silver takes, you can just drop a pawn and now the silver is actually trapped. So this is actually a very common idea when you're attacking Yagoda as Gangi, is this knight to 4-5, and you don't need to defend the knight. So it lets you keep this extra pawn in hand, and he already has this edge attack going. So it's quite a benefit, I guess you could say, to the Gangi player, that you don't have to defend this knight right away. Itodani plays pawn to 5-5, and this is obviously trying to attack the bishop's head, but the nice thing about this pawn to 5-5 move is that it opens up this 5-4 square. So now if the silver takes, it has a retreat square. So Fujii jumps into action. He can't just allow the silver to take the knight anymore. So he drops the pawn to 2-4. This threat of promoting the pawn is bigger than getting the knight, so Itodani has to answer it. Now he's forced to trade bishops, and after the pawn drop, Fujii retreats the rook to 2-5, and now he's able to defend the knight. So a really nice sequence from Fujii here. Itodani drops his bishop, counterattacking the knight, and Fujii says, okay, I'll drop my pawn now, I'll defend the knight. So Itodani is trying to attack on the left side of the board here, while Fujii is attacking on the right side. Takes the pawn, he gets to take the pawn with check, Fujii has to defend it, and then Itodani gets to promote his bishop. After the bishop promotes, Fujii retreats his rook. Now the knight is guarded by the pawn, he doesn't need to defend it, and because the bishop promoted, this rook was now looking at the back rank promotion, and so he had to bring the rook back to defend it. Tarefu, pawn drop, he gets to promote it, it's kind of bad news, so he takes it with the gold, counterattacking with tempo on the horse retreats, and then a pawn promotion on the edge. So now he's going to kind of cash in on the moves that he had put in earlier to set up this edge attack. Pawn drop on 1-4. This is a classic idea where you bring the lance all the way to 1-4, and when you drop this pawn on 2-4 after it gets taken and the rook takes, now the rook is threatening forward and horizontally. So it's not exactly a fork in this spot, sometimes it can be, but this is actually a common edge attack that you should keep in mind if you're struggling with your edge attacks. Pawn takes, silver takes, and then pawn drop on 5-7, and there's just some pawn maneuvering for a while, and then silver takes the knight, pawn takes, and then the knight drops back. So yes, he had to trade his silver for the knight, but he's going to get it right back because he has this fork. And so Fujii drops the pawn on 2-2. There's a proverb called "Don't run from a fork," right? And so that's what he's doing here. Either take, he can at least take it back, and he can use that move to go ahead and attack elsewhere. Takes the gold, takes the knight with the pawn promotion. You might want Itodani to take this, and I think the engine actually also thinks this is the best move. But I think if you do this, it's a bit slow. I think like bishop drops here and here are a little bit scary. The engine thinks pawn drop 2-3 can be a little bit scary. I analyzed this earlier with the engine. It initially thinks pawn drop 2-3 is really scary, but then the deeper it reads, it thinks it's still a fine position for Gote as well. So yeah, like Itodani just decides to play this way. I think his main idea here is that after the pawn takes on 2-1, he wants to run his king because he wants to run his king away from this rook anyway. Okay, so knight takes, pawn takes the knight, king runs, knight takes back, and then Itodani gets to promote the rook on 7-7. This is super scary for Fujii, obviously, but when you look at the eval, the engine likes this position with the move silver drop on 6-8. And this is actually the move that a lot of the commentators wanted to play as well. The reason why they wanted to play this move is that, hey, this is kind of scary and I want my king to be safe. But actually, if you analyze this position deeply and like kind of do a lot of variations with the engine, the main reason that the engine really likes playing silver on 6-8, yes, it is about king safety, but it's very concrete, which is that the weakness in Fujii's camp here is this pawn on 6-7. Right? So this horse can get to it quite easily and that would essentially just be a mate right away because it also blocks the king's escape route. And this is like clearly such a weakness that in a lot of variations, the engine wants to drop pawn on 6-6 as well. And so Fujii ends up playing knight drop on 4-4, obviously a very aggressive way. But again, the engine wanted to drop the silver. It defends here. And then even after something like dragon to 8-8, the engine still doesn't want to play knight drop on 4-4, which is what Fujii played. It actually wants, prefers very, very much so, knight drop on 6-6. And this actually does two things. One, it blocks that pawn drop on 6-6. That is one of Itodani's biggest threats. And B, this is a comment from one of the pro commentators, is that when you're trying to figure out how to attack your opponent's camp, what you want to do is try and figure out which piece is the best defensive piece for your opponent and attack that piece. And in this case, the best defensive piece isn't this gold, it's actually this horse. So the engine is kind of like killing two birds with one knight drop here. It's blocking the pawn drop and attacking the strongest defensive piece in Itodani's camp. So this is what the engine wanted. Fujii goes for the much more forcing aggressive route, knight drop on 4-4. And here you can see from the eval, engine wants to play this pawn drop 6-6 move. It's a huge threat, and it just kind of blows up Fujii's camp immediately. But Itodani instead plays this check, and the idea behind playing the check first is if you allow knight takes on 3-2, getting the gold, when you make this dragon 7-8 check, Fujii would be able to respond with gold drop on 6-8, defending with tempo. So he wanted to avoid that and put in the check first so that Fujii can't defend with gold drop on 6-8. But it turns out that this isn't great, mainly because Fujii can just run the king, and that's what Fujii ends up playing. And Itodani makes a pretty big mistake here with gold to 3-3. Now, at the point where Fujii dropped the knight on 4-4, he was down to 6 or 7 minutes of time, whereas Itodani still had 2 hours left on his clock. And actually, this is really Itodani's style, is to play very quickly and then play moves that you're not expecting, and you only have a short amount of time to respond to them. But this was a bit too much of a mistake, probably. And Fujii doesn't quite capitalize on it immediately. He plays the second best move, knight takes on 3-2, but the engine sees this really savage move, bishop drop on 6-1, completely ignoring the fact that the rook can be taken. You can see it even takes the engine a little bit of time immediately. So basically the idea is if you take the rook here, now I can promote the bishop, and you're basically completely surrounded. King has to go to 3-3, and then you can take the gold, and basically Godet's king is just in a whole world of hurt here. So this was the sharpest move. Fujii didn't see it. Fujii decides instead he's going to take the gold, which is also, it is the second best move, and probably one that he's been reading for a while, right? Like the whole point of dropping the knight was to take this gold. And I think Itodani's idea with why he wanted to play gold to 3-3 is that in this position, or in a lot of the previous positions, after this knight takes on 3-2, Itodani just had to ignore it and run, and then hopefully make a faster attack. But instead, now that he's played gold to 3-3, he can go ahead and take the promoted knight. And this looks very safe now, right? Your king has a lot of room to run over here, and you have these two really strong defensive pieces on this side, seemingly defending this rook and the toking, but it turns out that it actually doesn't quite work as a defense. And the main reason is toking to 2-2. Technically, I think the engine likes toking to 3-1 better. I didn't really look too closely into why, and I think it's like a depth issue. It's hard to tell for sure, but toking to 2 is much more straightforward, I think, because okay, horse can't take it because the rook will promote. And here, what the engine wants to kind of keep the game going a bit longer is to actually run the horse away. The idea being the rook can't enter anyway. You keep the horse on the board, defending, right? It was the strongest defensive piece before. It still is now. And it basically, hopefully, at least, paves kind of the way for your king to run up the board. That's not what Itodani plays. Itodani decides, okay, let me just completely kill the attack. Let me take the rook. And when the token takes, I think he thought he could just take it back and there's not really an attack anymore. But it turns out that if you take the token here, there's actually just mate immediately with knight drop on 4-4. So I'm guessing this is what Itodani missed when he went for that gold to 3-3, which is, even though it kind of looks very solid to have this golden horse here, it actually just gets broken up immediately. And so this is what happens in the game. And Itodani, once he gets here, I think he realized he can't take it. And so he runs to 5-3. But now Fujii gets to drop this bishop, cutting off the escape route of Itodani's king. Itodani blocks to try and reopen the escape route. But then Fujii finds this move, token to 4-2, threatening to just take this knight. And if you just simply take the token, it's mate immediately by knight drop on 5-4, so you can't take it either. So instead, what Itodani does is try and set up this counterattack. It's kind of a trap, not a great one, honestly. It turns out there's only one move to avoid a checkmate here, which is still the most obvious move, which is to just block with the knight. So for example, if you block with any of the other pieces, let's just say the silver, since it's the next least strong piece, it's actually a mate starting with this knight drop on 3-7. Gold takes, and then you have this really nice move, gold sacrifice on 5-9, and after the king takes, rook can take this. Whatever piece is dropped here, it doesn't matter, this is going to be a mate, right? Or whatever piece, as long as it's not the knight. But yes, it turns out the knight drop, which is also the most obvious, in that sequence, having a knight after you drop a pawn to block that rook check, there's no more checks because you can't drop the knights here. So Itodani here tries to take the token. His idea is, hey, I forced you to use the knight, so now I can take the token because that knight drop on 5-4 doesn't exist. But actually, bishop drop on 3-1, you can't take either of the bishops because it's just going to be a gold on the head. So he needs to run the king to 4-3. But now Fujii gets to take the silver, and this is where Itodani resigned the game. If you take the horse, there's just a very simple mate starting with gold drop on 4-4. You can only run straight back because the bishop is blocking these two squares. And then after silver drop on the head, if you run, bishop can promote for mate. And if you take the bishop, there's just silver drop on 4-2. Very, very straightforward and simple mate. So yeah, it's a sweep for Fujii. I think this was probably the most interesting and close game. Fujii kind of made that mistake with the knight drop on 4-4, and I think Itodani had a chance. He kind of just messed up a little bit. I think he just didn't quite understand how strong attacking 6-7 was. Because he was prioritizing these other moves like getting the dragon in. And I think if he had prioritized this pawn drop on 6-6 move, which is what the engine wanted to do, then he had a really good chance, I think, of being able to win the game. But he didn't see it. Fujii retains his Meijin title with a sweep. Yeah, I'm planning on making a lot more videos soon. There's a lot of interesting games that are being played recently. I was just busy this last week, so I'm a little bit late in putting this one out. But yeah, I think this week you'll be able to look forward to more videos. So if you're not subscribed, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you again later. Thanks.